The Galactic Empire didn't declare war with weapons. They used words, broadcast across the galaxy, in every language, on every frequency. The screen lit up with the face of Supreme Executor Tavark, his skin an unnatural blue-gray that shimmered. With biological armor, his voice was translated by flawless AI modulation, smooth and sterile. To the inhabitants of Earth, he began, with the condescension of a ruler speaking to vermin, you have been observed, monitored, measured, and found wanting. Across Earth's orbital stations, cities, and off-world colonies, the message played on loop. From Martian domes to Pacific arcologies, humans stood frozen, watching as the Empire publicly handed down its verdict. You are cowards, Tavark continued, eyes narrow slits, hiding behind rocks, scrambling in primitive ships, sending diplomats instead of warriors. You lack the spine for conflict. You lack the soul for survival. Inside a Black Ops war room hidden a kilometer beneath Antarctica's glacial crust, the broadcast ended with a hiss of static. The room remained silent. The dozen men seated around the obsidian conference table exchanged looks, most unreadable, a few clenched with anger. The woman standing at the far end of the room didn't flinch. She hadn't moved during the entire message. Her frame was lean, deceptively quiet. Her eyes were unreadable, glacial, calculating. The general to her left finally spoke. Same playbook, psychological dominance. They want to goad us into overplaying our hand. Another leaned forward. They think we have no teeth. They think we'll send fleets. The speaker was an older man, retired 3 times, still, wearing a rank patch. They expect a grand show, counter-spectacle. Same script we've seen a dozen times. No one looked at the woman, but the room was circling toward her. What's the human response? A voice asked. Silence followed. The general across the table, a man known for fire and fury, leaned forward and slid a thin data tablet down the polished surface. It stopped directly in front of her. On the screen, a single word, Yaga. She didn't look at the file. She didn't need to. It's not about the message, said the general. It's about the timing. Why now? Because they think we're broken, someone else replied. After Rio, after Theta 6, they think we're limping. We are, the older man admitted, which is why we don't answer with noise, the general said. We answer with a whisper. All eyes turned to her. She spoke for the first time. Operational window, 12 hours. Entry point, Ganymede Sector, Empire-controlled mining station. Light military presence. Low-level AI surveillance. Zero expectation of retaliation. Her voice was low, melodic, but with edges like shattered glass. Target class? Stage 1, disruption and extraction. Extraction, fear, the words settled like fog. No one corrected it. She nodded once. Burn the logs, set the timer. She turned, heading toward the blast-sealed corridor behind her. As she left, the lights dimmed by 2 degrees. No one told them to. The system simply knew. In the Empire's Ganymede outpost, the night shift was slow, sterile. Machines mined the surface with surgical precision, strip mining silicate layers for warp-reactive ore. The station was manned by only 30 personnel, technicians, engineers, 2 command officers, mostly Athari, a subservient Empire species with tentacular limbs and a nervous system tuned for multitasking. Efficient, predictable, perfectly unprepared. The first signal loss occurred at 0219 local. A single maintenance drone stopped transmitting. Minor, within redundancy tolerances, logged and dismissed. The second loss at 0220 took down half the outpost's external surveillance net. Static crackled in the command center. The lead officer, a pale-hued Xerian, squinted at the displays. Internal diagnostics showed no anomalies. Check the core node, he barked. Run manual trace. The techs obeyed. 2 more sensors vanished. One recorded an anomalous silhouette in its final moment. Humanoid, blurred, moving fast. Send the sentries. 2 perimeter bots detached from their charging bays. gliding across the rocky terrain toward the sector with the missing signal. They vanished within 90 seconds. "Do we have contact?" the officer demanded. A junior tech answered, voice tight. "No. And, sir, someone rerouted our comms array." "To what?" "To loop our last broadcast internally. On every speaker." The Empire's message began to echo. "You are cowards. You lack the soul for survival." The officer's lips thinned. "Shut it down." The screen went black. The lights followed. Backup kicked in after a half-second delay, but in that breath of darkness, 6 personnel were gone. No alerts, no alarms. 1 second, bustling. The next, 6 empty chairs, tools dropped mid-task. No signs of struggle, no bodies. The officer drew his weapon, something ceremonial and mostly decorative, and pointed it at nothing. "Seal all doors, lock down this sector," another tech stammered. "Command override. It's not accepting inputs." "By who?" The room chilled. The officer felt the temperature drop, despite environmental controls reporting optimal levels. Then came the whisper. Not through speakers. Through the walls, a voice. A name. Baba Yaga. The lights flickered again. Not off, just enough to show movement in the corners. A suggestion of shadow. A scream from the ventilation shaft. Someone being pulled upward. Metal scraping, bones breaking. One technician bolted, ran down the main hallway toward the launch pad. The door ahead slid open, then slammed shut, bisecting him mid-step. The officer opened a comm line to orbit. Emergency. Total breach. Unknown hostile. Possible Psi-class weapon. Request evac. I repeat. Static. Then a voice answered. Not from the ship above, but from his own comm line. "Evac denied," she said. The words were soft, almost kind. "Your Empire called us cowards. You thought fear was weakness. You forgot what fear does to humans." A pause. "It teaches us to become predators." The transmission ended with a high-pitched hum, then silence. From orbit, the station's power grid showed a cascading failure. One by one, core systems shut down. Not destroyed, disabled with precision. Redundant backups failed in sequence, tripping each other's safeties. It was as if the station had been taught to self-destruct, without the actual destruction. 17 minutes after the first anomaly, the outpost went entirely dark. The Teat Empire dispatched a reconnaissance unit. Fast response, light-armored, elite. They arrived 6 hours later. They found no bodies, no blood, no signs of physical struggle. Only one thing remained. A single command terminal still powered. On its screen, a single line. "She's here," in the Imperial High Command Chamber. Commander Tivark stood alone in front of the playback. The room behind him was full of hushed whispers, nervous clicks of mandibles, ripples of uncertainty, in what had once been a rigid hierarchy. He replayed the footage from the Ganymede station's last 10 seconds. The camera stuttered. The lens caught a figure at the edge of vision, just enough for speculation. She was human in shape, cloaked in adaptive mesh, moving faster than their AI could track. But it was her eyes that made the room still. Cold, pale, not enraged, but calm, calculating, as if none of it mattered, as if they didn't matter. He paused the footage, zoomed in. "She's just one," said the intelligence minister beside him. "A myth, a symbol." Tivark's voice was low. "Then why did 30 trained personnel vanish in 17 minutes without a sound?" The minister said nothing. Another admiral, skeletal and black-eyed, tried to laugh. "A ghost story." Tivark didn't smile. "Ghosts don't write messages," he said. The playback ended with the last screen from the terminal. "She's here." In the silence that followed, no one repeated the word coward. The carrier ship, Obedience Unquestioned, drifted through the void with imperial elegance, its hull glimmering with the polished metals of hundreds of conquered worlds. On board, Commander Vrel, a Zirian tactician famed for pacifying 4 rebellious systems, stood before a translucent map of the Sol system. His long fingers clicked in irritation as he traced the faint root of the entity known only now by whispers, Baba Yaga. He despised the name. It carried no origin, no classification. It violated the Empire's core philosophy, that everything could be catalogued, measured, subdued. Yet here he was, assigned not to command legions but to understand something human, something irrational, something that, by all metrics, should not exist. The lead scientist, a Gen-class cognitive analyst with a memory span of over 3 centuries, approached with 2 floating datapads and a tone laced with discomfort. We've reviewed the Ganymede event 12 times. No thermal signatures, no energy spikes, no biological remains. All sensor data terminates at the same 2-second frame. Vrel, didn't turn. Run it again. It's the same anomaly, then run the anomaly. The analyst sighed, a useless human gesture she had adopted for negotiations, and activated the playback. Shadows flickered, growing impossibly elongated, warping physics. At the center of the distortion, a humanoid form emerged with fluidity. Beyond known kinetics, no armor, no visible weaponry, just presence and speed. Vrel stared, not at the figure but at the expressions of those around it. Panic, not the kind born of logic, but the primal reaction of prey recognizing a predator it was never meant to encounter. He finally spoke. "What emotion is this?" The analyst hesitated. "There is no Zerian term for it. The closest human equivalent is dread." Vrel clicked his mandibles. "Useless emotion." "Apparently not to them," she said quietly. Across the ship's lower decks, the security division conducted drills with growing intensity. What had begun as a minor protocol response was evolving into a full-scale internal mobilization. Officers trained without knowing why. Engineers were instructed to reinforce inner hulls, not external plating. Surveillance drones were repositioned, inward, and still, no one used the word panic. In Earth's sub-crust command vault, the team, behind Yaga, monitored Imperial chatter. Their feeds were dark net intercepts, low-bandwidth hijacks of the Empire's encrypted streams. Most of the data was static. The useful parts came in whispers: increased internal fleet movements, unusual power fluctuations in scout ships, internal command lockdowns. "She's working," one of the analysts muttered, half in awe. The general, standing behind him, nodded. "Not just killing them, teaching them. She's rewriting how they think." Another leaned in. "They're adapting." The general frowned. "Good. You want that?" "I want them scared enough to stop underestimating us, and smart enough to realize fear isn't a defect. It's a forge." Far above them, circling Jupiter's orbit, an Empire outpost known as Relay Station Oth-9 suddenly went silent. The last internal broadcast was time-stamped at ZO 4002 standard, a simple phrase spoken in clear Imperial dialect. "Who told you we were the weak ones?" The phrase repeated 3 times, each instance louder, sharper. The last time, the audio input device ruptured from internal vibration. 7 crew members disappeared. 1 remained, tied upside down in the gravity chamber, barely alive, muttering, "Loop." She walked through the walls. She was already inside. Empire Command quarantined the station. No recovery teams were dispatched. No questions were filed. On obedience unquestioned, Commander Vrel studied the compiled behavioral data. Human military strategies were chaotic, non-linear. They left bait, turned defeat into disinformation, made up ghost units just to exhaust enemy resources. No other species engaged in this kind of warfare. The Empire had always considered it sloppy, inefficient. Now they were not so sure. "I've read human folklore," said the analyst beside him. "Baba Yaga wasn't just a warrior. She was a witch, a legend, a story told to make children behave." Vrel didn't look away from the screen. "We are not children. Then stop acting like it." Her tone was colder than regulation permitted, but he didn't reprimand her. He was too busy watching the slow change ripple through the ranks. The soldiers no longer moved with Imperial precision. Their turns were too quick. Their backs stayed, closer to walls. Jokes were whispered with brittle laughter. They no longer trusted the quiet. That, Vrel thought, is how it starts. The ship's AI, a sentient data organism referred to as Dominus, began to report anomalous readings within the ship. Not failures, just anomalies. Door mechanisms cycling without prompt. Environmental controls adjusting to imperceptible temperature shifts. One corridor repeated the same timestamp 3 times in succession before correcting. Dominus flagged these as minor glitches, but Vrel didn't believe in coincidence. At 0600 ship time, an engineering lieutenant failed to report for duty. His quarters were locked from the inside. When override was used, the room was found empty. No sign of forced entry or exit. On the wall, scrawled in a language forbidden in the Empire, was a single word: run. The officers gathered in the war room, trying to rationalize. Suggestions ranged from internal sabotage to advanced human cloaking tech. No one said her name, saying it was beginning to feel like summoning. On Earth, the woman codenamed Yaga sat alone in a silent chamber with no lights, no external connections, no comforts. Her breathing was steady. Her mind was quiet. She could feel them watching her. Through satellite loops, data echoes, psychic signature trackers, all useless. You couldn't find what didn't leave a trace. She wasn't hiding. She was arriving, and they were only now learning what that meant. She opened her eyes and sent the next trigger. In Empire-controlled space, the dreadnought silencer of rebellion suddenly changed course without command input. Its navigational AI began broadcasting old Earth radio signals, snippets of jazz, Morse code, 90s commercials. Every attempt to override failed. On board, the crew experienced what the logs later described as full sensory hallucinations. Corridors looped endlessly. Voices of loved ones whispered from air vents. Doors refused to lead to the same place twice. One officer was found dead, drowned in a room with no water. No human touched that ship, not physically. But every system inside had been touched by her presence, somehow. Commander Vrel began to understand. This wasn't insurgency, it was invasion. Not of territory, but of thought, of perception. He finally called the Council, a direct line to Imperial High Command. I no longer request reinforcements, he said. I request containment protocols. We are not fighting a soldier. We are confronting an idea given form, and it is inside our fleet. Tavark's face appeared on the monitor, less polished than before, less amused. You think she's more than human? I think humans have decided to become more than human. A long silence passed, then escalate. No, that's what she wants. Escalation feeds her. Tavark narrowed his eyes, then suppress her. We tried, and she became myth. We called her coward. She became fear. We challenged her honor. She answered with silence. She is weaponizing our assumptions. We created this. Tavark leaned forward. Then uncreate it. Vrel turned away from the monitor. Too late for that. In his private quarters, Vrel began to study Earth history. Not its wars, but its stories. The irrational, the symbolic, the monstrous. He was looking not for strategy, but intent. Trying to learn what the humans had buried in myth that they now dared to resurrect. He came across an old human phrase. Dated. Outmoded. But something about it made the room colder. Tell a human they cannot win, and you will meet the version of them that does not care about survival. The Empire's might had never faced that version before. Now it had, and in the darkness between stars, something began to hum. A rhythm, a call, a voice that needed no language. She was not done, she was only beginning. The Empire's fleet regrouped in orbit around Tau Ceti Prime, a temporary fallback point cloaked under layers of gravity distortion and quantum silence. Ships were arranged in spiraled formation, engines humming in low sync, signaling a readiness. That felt more like superstition than protocol. This wasn't a retreat. That word didn't exist in the High Command's lexicon. It was a recalibration, an acknowledgement, covert and unspoken, that something new had entered their domain and refused to follow the rules. Commander Vrel stood in the shadow of the fleet's central mind core, silent, watching the projections flicker across the curved glass of the strategy dome. Patterns no longer aligned. Human tactics bent in ways that felt personal, intimate, as if someone inside their algorithms was turning the Empire's systems into weapons against themselves. Across the room, Sub-Commander Hallex adjusted a display. He was younger, still clinging to the old belief in overwhelming force. The ship anomalies are spreading. 18 vessels have reported hallucinatory effects. 10 experienced partial system override. 1 destroyer was found orbiting upside down with its own crew sealed. In containment, no breach detected. Only a message burned into the hull. She sees you. Vrel didn't respond. The air felt heavier than gravity could explain. The longer this campaign dragged on, the less control they had, not just over the battlefield, but over the narrative. The Empire thrived on control, names, definitions. They named planets before they landed. They named prisoners before interrogation. But this woman, this myth made flesh, refused to be boxed. Every attempt to define her only gave her power. On Earth, the War Council convened in the lower strata of the Ark Core, buried beneath what used to be the Rockies. A dozen minds linked by secure cognitive bridge. Military, scientific, behavioral, even theological. Yaga wasn't just a weapon anymore. She was a strategy, a philosophy. The manifestation of a truth humanity had buried for centuries. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for orders. She moved. And because she moved, the Empire hesitated. "She's in their heads," said General Anya Voss, the only woman who ever got close enough to train with Yaga before the war. "She's making them doubt their own tech, their own senses. We trained her to kill. She evolved to disrupt. Psychological warfare? No, ideological. They believe in hierarchy. She's erasing the top of the pyramid. Then what's the end game?" Voss tapped a data tile revealing the live feed from a compromised dreadnought. Internal footage of soldiers refusing to patrol alone, officers jumping at shadows, automatic turrets turning on without command. The endgame is collapse, not of their ships, of their certainty. In Tau Ceti's orbit, the Empire issued Protocol Redwake, a last resort measure used only against planetary-level infestations or high-concept anomalies. Entire sections of the fleet were sectioned off, firewalled, sealed from centralized command to prevent conceptual contamination. Soldiers were fitted with dampeners to suppress irrational fear. AI systems were wiped and reinstalled using base code centuries out of date, hoping that older tech would be immune to whatever influence she wielded. But suppression only made her stronger. That was the mistake they kept making, assuming she could be constrained like a plague. She wasn't a virus. She was awareness. It began with dreams. Reports surfaced of crew members experiencing synchronized nightmares, visions of a cabin in the woods, surrounded by metal trees and voices that spoke in riddles. None of them knew Earth mythology. None had been exposed to human cultural data. Yet they described the same figure, a woman with eyes like broken stars and footsteps that didn't echo. The Empire's neurosorcerers were dispatched. Trained in mind defense and psychic shielding, they had cracked telepaths and erased rebellion before it started. They entered the dreams willingly. None of them returned functional. One tore his own tongue out. Another built a door in his cell and sat before it whispering, "She's already on the other side." Commander Vrel reviewed the footage personally, frame by frame, and for the first time, he noticed something that chilled him deeper than any loss. The Empire was losing not because of what she did, but because of what she allowed. Humans, ordinary, flawed, irrational humans, had begun to imitate her, not in skill, in methodology. Officers within the resistance were using fear tactics, timing their strikes to coincide with superstition, leaving messages with no logical purpose, except to stir doubt. Earth's fleets, limited as they were, moved like her, fast, silent, impossible to predict. Even without her presence, she had altered the battlefield. He summoned his analyst. "Project her influence curve." She hesitated. "It doesn't stop." "What do you mean?" "It doesn't drop, it spreads. Her impact is non-local. It exists wherever her story is believed. You're telling me we're at war with a belief system? I'm telling you, she said slowly. You started by calling them cowards. And now they've turned that accusation into a doctrine of vengeance. He stared at the screen where human ships danced like sparks. Too small to matter, too fast to stop. That's impossible. Commander, she said. What's happening isn't war. It's cultural reprogramming. And we're the test subjects. Vrel dismissed her with a wave, but her words stuck like barbs. He paced the command deck, watching the way even his most seasoned officers avoided the corners of rooms, the way they no longer sat with their backs exposed. The Jirian mind prided itself on logic, predictability, but under sustained exposure to her methods, even that was fracturing. One of his officers was caught trying to disable his own implant, said he wanted to hear the silence she walks in. Another rigged the gravity controls in his bunk so he'd sleep floating, trying to mimic the old Earth tales of witches who flew. This wasn't discipline breaking. This was identity corrosion. On the edges of Empire space, patrol ships began reporting full crew abandonment. No violence, no sabotage, just silence. As if the crews had simply walked off into the dark, following something only they could hear. In every case, the final log was the same, a short phrase transmitted across open channels. She doesn't kill you. She converts you. That scared Vrel more than any weapon, more than any fleet. He understood conquest. He didn't understand infection of belief. In the inner sanctum of the High Command, Tvark demanded answers. We are the dominant force, this galaxy. We are not designed to feel. Why are my commanders reporting fear? Vrel responded with an answer that felt like betrayal. Because she feels, and she's teaching us what that makes possible. You admire her? I understand her. That's more dangerous. Silence hung like execution. Tvark narrowed his gaze. Then it is time for purification. We will glass Earth. End the myth. No, Vrel said sharply. You refuse an order? I refuse to feed the fire. If we destroy Earth, she becomes a martyr. If we kill their world, the story spreads to others. It is no longer about humans. It is about what they represent. Then, what is your solution? I do not have one, Vrel admitted. But I know what she wants. Tvark scoffed. You think she wants peace? No, she wants recognition. You called her kind cowards. She made you listen. Now she waits for you to acknowledge what you denied. And if we don't? Vrel didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because even now, in the safest ship of the mightiest fleet ever constructed, surrounded by logic and firepower and unyielding order, every single soldier still looked twice at empty corridors, still listened for footsteps in places no one walked, and somewhere, far from their sensors, deep in the cold between stars, the woman without a face, the myth that bled into systems and silence, moved again. Not to strike, to teach. She wasn't fighting for Earth anymore. She was fighting for the right of fear to mean something. And the Empire, for all its pride, was learning that lesson one shattered certainty at a time. The Baba Yaga did not strike again. She waited. And that, more than any weapon, destabilized the Empire. Across thousands of monitored sectors, nothing happened. No ships were hijacked. No soldiers vanished. No strange symbols appeared carved into hulls or burned into floors. There was only stillness, and stillness for the Empire was unacceptable. Stillness implied uncertainty. Uncertainty bred fear. Fear, in their system, was treason. High Command flooded the silence with directives, sweep patterns, preemptive strikes. Propaganda injects reminding troops that fear was a pathogen, and that belief in myth was punishable by neural erasure. But no message could outpace the whisper that had already taken root. She was no longer a presence. She was an absence, a void in the patterns, a shadow that made every silence suspect. Commander Vrel had stopped sleeping entirely. He no longer trusted his dreams. When his second officer, Hallex, began speaking in riddles and drawing trees on his console with blood, Vrel did not report him. He simply watched and listened, and wondered whether this was defeat or transformation. His mind split between obligation and awe. A signal came through the outer shell, a dead zone no human ship should have reached without detection. One transmission. One voice. I've sent coordinates. Bring your cleanest command ship, no escorts. No weapons, no AI, just you. If you decline, I will not come again. No signature, no threat. Just coordinates in the dust cloud surrounding a red dwarf marked uninhabitable by Imperial archives. The Empire debated the request with fury. Tvark demanded annihilation. Others called it a trap. But Vrel knew the truth, and it weighed heavier than his rank. She wasn't calling him to die. She was calling him to understand, so he went. Alone. The ship he chose was old, analog, retrofitted with manual controls. No data link, no AI core. He didn't want surveillance. He didn't want to return with evidence. He wanted to know for himself whether the myth had a face. The rendezvous point was a station carved into an asteroid, orbiting a dead moon. Its existence defied records. Its structure made no sense. Part Earth architecture, part Imperial geometry, part something else entirely. It pulsed like it was alive. Vrel entered through an airlock without resistance. No guards, no scanners. Only a corridor lined with rusted mirrors and soundless light. She waited in the center chamber, not armored, not cloaked, just standing there wrapped in fabric the color of blood mixed with ash, her hands bare. Her face was still unreadable, not because it was hidden, but because it refused to register. His mind saw her and couldn't. Hold the image. Like a dream fading on waking. You wanted to speak? He asked, voice dry from recycled air and unspoken questions. I wanted you to listen, she said. To what? She stepped aside, revealing a projection that flickered. Into existence. A holographic star map, not of conquest, but of consequence. Imperial systems highlighted in red, Earth systems in blue. But the rest, the overwhelming vastness of it, was black, silent, marked only by coordinates with no names. In each, an icon, spiral, claw, eye, crack, void. We're not the only ones, she said. And we're not the biggest problem. He stared. The Empire had never encountered threats beyond its expansion front. It was unchallenged. This map suggested otherwise. What are those, he asked. Things older than belief. Predators of empires, watchers of minds. They don't invade with ships. They wait for civilizations to rot from the inside. Then they feed, he swallowed. Why tell me? Because your empire's rot has a sound now, it's loud enough to draw attention. And you? She looked at him with eyes he still couldn't process. I'm not here to fight you anymore. I'm here to make you feel the stakes. You thought humanity was a backwater infestation. You were wrong. We're the first to see the signs and survive. Not because of our strength, but because of our madness, our refusal to die quietly. You used fear to win. No, she said. I used recognition. You dismissed us, called us cowards. That was your first mistake. You assumed war was about weapons. But war is about narrative, about who shapes the story that gets remembered. He stepped closer. You think the Empire can be turned? I think it already has. Your fleets hesitate, your commanders whisper. You brought a civilization into contact with a force it cannot quantify. Emotion. And now that door doesn't close. Vrel stood in silence. The map shifted, highlighting 3 black systems now pulsing. What happens if we ignore this? You won't get a second chance to react. They don't invade. They unravel. Culture, biology, memory. You'll forget what stars are. You'll forget you were. And if we join you? Her smile wasn't kind. It was tragic. Then we stand a chance. A broken, bloody, miserable chance. But a chance. Outside, time dilated. The Empire's most elite dreadnoughts hovered in neutral space, unaware their commander had already crossed a threshold none of them could comprehend. Debates raged about protocols, retaliation, containment, but none of it mattered now. The future had changed course. When Vrel returned, he didn't bring data. He brought warning. and a challenge. He addressed the high command with new eyes. You called them cowards. You were wrong. He uploaded the map, not all of it, just enough. Enough to shake the foundations. There are things coming. Things that don't care about hierarchy. Things that devour certainty. You want control. But survival isn't about control. It's about adaptation. That's why we lost to her. That's why we need her. Tvark stood, eyes blazing. This is surrender. No, Vril said, this is evolution. The chamber erupted in arguments, but none of it reached the point. The seed was already planted. Somewhere deep in the Empire's heart, officers began questioning orders. Soldiers whispered the name they weren't supposed to remember. Baba Yaga. Not a woman, not a ghost, not even a human anymore. She was a pivot. The moment the galaxy changed direction, Earth rebuilt in silence, not because it was safe, but because the real war hadn't started. Those who followed her weren't soldiers. They were interpreters, translators between species and silence. She taught them how to look at fear without blinking. She wasn't everywhere, but she didn't need to be. The idea of her, what she meant now, lived in data streams, in untraceable dreams, in the gaps between logic and gut instinct, and the Empire, for all its power, could only respond the way all old empires eventually did. It began to imitate its enemy. Vrel knew the end wouldn't be grand. There would be no final battle, no victory parade. The end would be slow, creeping, a shift in vocabulary, in ritual, in thought. Where once there had been pride, there would now be preparation. Where once there had been dominance, there would be curiosity. And in the center of it, the myth they tried to erase would remain unkillable, uncontainable. Because the truth wasn't that humans had won. The truth was that they'd been right. Cowards don't fight myths, but survivors learn from them. And somewhere beyond the veil of stars, something ancient paused for the first time in eons, because it heard something new echoing through the dark. Not a scream, not a prayer, a laugh. Low, dangerous, human.